Our parents showered my sister's child with gifts and gave absolutely nothing to mine, and then. The morning sunlight was just starting to pour through the kitchen windows when I leaned against the counter, sipping my coffee and glancing over my calendar. My day looked typical enough. Client calls stacked between mid-morning and late afternoon, a parent-teacher conference at noon for Spencer, and the usual Friday errands I'd pushed off until the last possible minute. Jared was still upstairs getting ready, and Spencer would probably tumble down the stairs in his mismatched pajamas any second, full of questions and too much energy for 7 in the morning. Right on cue, I heard the familiar thudding of feet. Spencer came barreling into the kitchen, hair sticking up in every direction, pajamas twisted around his small frame, but his face lit up with excitement. "Mom, can you help me with my volcano?" he asked breathlessly, clutching a crumpled instruction sheet for his science project. I set my coffee down and smiled, reaching to smooth his hair as best I could. "Of course, sweetheart. But breakfast first, then lava." Spencer was our only child, and everything about him felt like a blessing Jared and I never took for granted. We'd been married for almost a decade, building a life that didn't come with any grand gestures or glossy finishes, but it was steady and real. Jared worked for a local renovation firm. Nothing glamorous, but he was good at it and proud of what he did. We lived in a comfortable house outside St. Louis, nothing showy, but filled with warmth. We had built it together, slowly, deliberately, piece by piece. As I poured cereal into Spencer's bowl, my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen and immediately sighed. It was a message from my sister, Callie. "Hey, just saw Delilah's cheer regional showcase got moved. Any chance we can shift Mom's birthday dinner? It overlaps now." "Sorry." I stared at the text for a few seconds, my fingers curling slightly around the phone. This wasn't the first time this had happened. Last time it was a piano recital. Before that, a drama camp. Every single family event seemed to orbit around Delilah's ever-growing list of engagements. I typed back slowly, forcing my tone to sound neutral. "I'll ask Mom, but we already moved the date once. It might be tough." Spencer didn't notice anything was off. He was busy crunching cereal and humming to himself while flipping through the experiment instructions. Jared walked into the kitchen, freshly showered and rubbing sleep from his eyes. He saw my expression and didn't need to ask. "Callie again?" he said, already reaching for the coffee pot. I nodded, handing him my phone. He scanned the message and gave a small shake of his head. "Not surprised," he muttered. "Last week when I grabbed a beer with Miles, he was acting strange. Barely said much. He's usually bragging about whatever new car he's buying or how Delilah's gifted. That caught my attention." "Miles? Weird," I asked, lowering my voice slightly. Jared nodded. "Yeah. Looked like someone who was carrying a weight he couldn't talk about. Kept saying he was dealing with some family stuff, but wouldn't go into detail." Jared shrugged, clearly as puzzled as I was. It didn't make sense. Miles lived for showing off. Even during simple backyard barbecues, he'd strut around like he was presenting his family for a photo shoot. If something was actually wrong, he wasn't the type to keep it under wraps for long. Callie had always been a bit of a firecracker, impulsive, dramatic, but good at playing innocent when things got messy. She was the kind of person who left trails behind her, but rarely seemed to get blamed for the chaos. Growing up, it was like watching her set fires and somehow get applauded for how warm they were. Mom never saw it. Or maybe she did and just didn't care. A few days passed. I'd buried the text exchange with Callie under piles of work and Spencer's science project, which we'd managed to turn into a halfway functioning volcano using vinegar, baking soda, and a roll of paper towels. I was in my office one afternoon, finishing up notes for a client's audit prep, when my phone rang. The name on the screen stopped me cold. It was Miles. I stared at it for a beat longer than I should have, my mind racing. We never talked directly. Ever. Whatever was going on, it wasn't casual. I picked up. "Hi, Miles. Everything all right?" His voice was low, brittle even. "I need to talk to you. Not over the phone. Can we meet? Today?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure of where this was going. "Sure. Where?" He suggested a small cafe in the city, far from their usual haunts. That alone told me this wasn't something he wanted ears on. When I arrived, I spotted him immediately, sitting at a corner table, both hands pressed over his face like he was trying to hold it together. Gone was the cocky, polished man in tailored shirts and cufflinks. What I saw instead was someone unraveling. He looked up when I approached, his eyes red-rimmed. "Thanks for coming," he said with a weak smile. I didn't know who else to talk to. I sat down and waited. He launched into it with barely any build-up. "We did one of those mail-order DNA kits," he said, running a hand down his face. Callie wasn't thrilled, but Delilah's teacher mentioned something about genetics in class, and I just had a weird feeling. I didn't speak. I didn't know what to say. "I know it sounds paranoid," he continued, "but something's always felt off. And when the results came in, there were these little discrepancies, blood types, markers. I haven't shown her yet. I wanted to talk to someone first." The silence between us stretched. My heart pounded in my chest. As much as I didn't want to be involved, I also couldn't unhear what he was telling me. "Are you saying you think Delilah isn't yours?" "I don't want to think that," he said quietly. "I love her more than anything. But if she's not mine biologically, I need to know. I need clarity. And Callie." He trailed off, then looked at me with a kind of helpless frustration. "You grew up with her. You know what she's like. Do you think she's capable of hiding something like this?" It was like he'd cracked open a wound I'd been ignoring for years. Callie had always gotten away with everything. She'd wrecked cars, lied about grades, dated guys who hurt her and others, and Mom always found a way to justify it. Me? I was the resilient one, the responsible one, the one who could handle being overlooked. I leaned forward and spoke slowly. "Callie lies when it benefits her. That's not new. But Delilah, she's just a kid. Whatever we find, it can't be allowed to hurt her." Miles nodded quickly. "Absolutely. She's my daughter no matter what. But I can't live in this gray area anymore." I took a deep breath, staring out the window for a moment before turning back to him. "All right, I'll help you. But only if we do this carefully, quietly, and with one rule: Delilah doesn't become collateral damage in this." His shoulders dropped, just a bit, like he was exhaling for the first time in days. "Thank you. I didn't know who else to trust." As we walked out of the cafe, my stomach churned with a storm I hadn't felt in years. There was a time when I would have stayed quiet, taken the high road like always. But something had changed. Maybe it was watching my son be treated like an afterthought. Maybe it was years of being passed over for someone who never learned to be accountable. Or maybe it was just time for the truth to matter more than keeping the peace. I didn't sleep much the night after meeting Miles. His words kept looping in my mind, whispering behind everything I did. Loading the dishwasher, folding laundry, brushing my teeth. I kept thinking about Delilah's sweet face, about Spencer watching from the sidelines while our mother clapped the loudest for her. All those dinners where Kayla was the center of attention, while Spencer politely waited for someone to ask him about his drawings, his books, his science projects. No one ever did. And that night, lying next to Jared in the dark, I realized something inside me had shifted. I was tired of pretending things were okay just to avoid a scene. 2 days later, I stood in front of my desk drawer with my hand resting on the smooth, white envelope. I hadn't opened it yet. Jason had ordered the formal paternity test through a private lab. Discreet, official, nothing that could be misunderstood or written off as a tech glitch. The results had arrived yesterday. The envelope had sat there like a time bomb, daring me to look, daring me to light the fuse. Jared came into the room and stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me with that quiet patience I'd always admired in him. "Are you going to open it?" he asked softly, keeping his voice low so Spencer wouldn't overhear from the living room. I shook my head. "Not yet. I promised Jason I'd do it with him. He wants to be there when I see it." Jared stepped closer, resting a hand gently on my back. "You don't owe this to him, you know. You're not responsible for the mess Callie made." I nodded, not entirely sure he was wrong. But the truth was, this wasn't just about Callie anymore. This was about years of silent frustration, of watching my son be pushed to the edges of his own family, of biting my tongue at every injustice, because speaking up only made me the problem. Saturday arrived before I was ready. Spencer's birthday was that afternoon, and of course, my mother had insisted on hosting. She said it would be easier to accommodate all the guests, but I knew better. She wanted to control the setting, and more importantly, she wanted to make sure Delilah had a stage. Jared and I loaded up the car with party supplies I'd picked out myself. Plates with rocket ships, napkins with dinosaurs, the kinds of things Spencer actually liked. I wasn't taking any chances this time. When we pulled into Mom's driveway, Spencer practically bounced out of the car with excitement. He loved birthdays. Even with everything, he still believed the best in people. That was something I both admired and feared. But when we walked into the house, my stomach dropped. The living room was drowning in pink and purple decorations, streamers, balloons, a massive Princess Delilah banner hanging above the fireplace. There wasn't a single mention of Spencer's name anywhere. My fists clenched before I could even stop myself. Jared froze next to me, his jaw tightening. Spencer looked around, his face slowly dimming as he tried to process what he was seeing. "What is all this?" I asked, my voice low but sharp as I turned to Mom. She smiled like nothing was out of place. "Callie did most of the decorating. Isn't it lovely? Delilah just got that big dance award, and we wanted to make her feel special. But it's Spencer's birthday," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. This was supposed to be his party. Mom waved her hand dismissively, the way she always did when she wanted to pretend she wasn't being cruel. "He's a boy. He doesn't care about decorations. You know he'll just want to run around outside anyway." I opened my mouth to argue, but the doorbell rang and guests started pouring in. Parents, kids, neighbors, smiling, chatting, none of them realizing the tension that had already taken root. I plastered a smile on my face and helped people find their way to the backyard. Meanwhile, Delilah was ushered around by my mother like she was royalty. Everyone was introduced to our little star, while Spencer quietly played with his friends, pretending not to notice that no one was making a fuss over him. Jared leaned close to me as we stood near the patio. "If your mom puts a tiara on Delilah, I swear I'm taking Spencer and we're going home." "I already packed an extra gift bag," I whispered back, just in case. When it was finally time for cake, I held my breath. Maybe, just maybe, there'd be something redeeming, some small gesture that would acknowledge my son. The cake came out of the kitchen on a silver tray, shaped like a superhero, decorated in bold red and blue frosting. Spencer's eyes lit up, and for a second, I thought maybe I'd been too cynical. Then Mom placed the cake in the center of the table and pulled Delilah beside her. "Come here, sweetie," she said cheerfully. "Blow out the candles with Grandma and make a wish for Spencer." The smile slid right off Spencer's face. "No," I said, stepping forward. "This is Spencer's birthday. He should blow out his own candles." Mom blinked, confused like she truly didn't understand what the issue was. "Well, of course. Of course. Spencer, come on over." He walked to the table slowly, face blank, and blew out the candles while the adults clapped half-heartedly. Delilah stood beside him, still front and center in all the pictures. After cake, it was time for presents. I'd been dreading this moment, but not even I expected what happened next. A table had been set up in the living room, piled high with gifts, beautiful wrapping paper, glittering ribbons, expensive bows. Delilah rushed over, squealing with excitement. Every tag had her name on it. Spencer stood at the edge of the table, looking from box to box, confusion growing in his eyes. "Grandma, where are my presents?" he asked in a small voice. Mom didn't even flinch. "These are for Delilah, sweetheart. She worked so hard this month. We wanted to reward her. Isn't that nice?" I felt my chest go tight, like someone had reached in and squeezed my heart with both hands. My fingers trembled at my sides. I couldn't breathe. "All the presents?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You gave every single one to Delilah on Spencer's birthday?" Callie appeared beside Mom, sipping wine, eyes half-lidded with boredom. "Come on, Madeline. Spencer doesn't even care about gifts. He never plays with new toys anyway. Delilah has talent. She needs encouragement." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the whole table across the room. But Spencer was watching me. He needed me to be strong, not loud. So I knelt beside him, pulled the second bag I'd brought from under my chair, and handed him two neatly wrapped packages. A science experiment kit and the dinosaur encyclopedia he'd begged for last month. His eyes went wide, and I smiled through the burn in my throat. Happy birthday, my brave boy, I whispered, pulling him into a hug. From me and Dad. Just for you. Jared came to stand beside me, resting a hand on my back. I could feel his own fury vibrating beneath his calm expression. I stood and turned to the room. Thank you all for coming, I said clearly, loud enough for every conversation to stop. We're taking Spencer to the park now. We want to celebrate the rest of his birthday together, as a family. Mom tried to say something, but I was already grabbing Spencer's hand and walking toward the door. I didn't look back. I wasn't going to let him see me cry. 2 weeks passed, but the heat from that birthday still burned in my chest like it had just happened yesterday. Every time I thought about Spencer standing quietly at the edge of the living room, surrounded by gifts addressed to a child who already had everything, I felt the blood in my veins thicken with anger. I didn't talk to my mother after we left her house. I didn't answer Callie's casual follow-up text about how delicious the cake was. I didn't respond when Mom sent a photo of Delilah playing with one of the presents that had been piled onto the table meant to honor my son. The envelope with the DNA results still sat in my drawer, unopened, but not untouched. I must have held it at least a dozen times, feeling its weight shift as the papers inside slid under the seal, taunting me. Jared asked me again one night if I really planned to open it. You know, once it's open, you can't put it back inside and pretend it didn't exist, he said, looking at me across the kitchen while he rinsed out Spencer's lunchbox. Jason can open it himself if he needs to know that badly. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling for a long moment before answering. He doesn't want to see it alone. And part of me needs to know too, Jared. I'm not just doing this for him anymore. He didn't argue, just wiped his hands on a towel and came to stand behind me. His fingers ran gently through my hair. Then just be careful. It's a hard thing to unsee. I called Jason the next day during my lunch break. My voice was steady, but I felt the churn building again, low and slow, like a storm on the horizon. I haven't opened it yet, I told him honestly. But if you still want to meet before the dinner, I'll bring it. He agreed without hesitation. 4 o'clock, Mom's driveway. For sharp. Sunday arrived with that hollow buzz that only family gatherings can bring. The kind where you know the food will be good, but the conversation will come with landmines. I got dressed slowly, carefully, choosing a plain navy sweater and jeans, nothing too formal, nothing that would make it seem like I was walking and ready for a war. The envelope went into my bag without fanfare. Spencer was in the living room, drawing planets with his markers while Jared packed up the side dish we'd promised to bring. He looked up at me as I passed through the hall and asked if Delilah would be there. I hesitated before answering. She'll probably be there, yeah, I said. But this dinner isn't about her, okay? You just be yourself. He nodded, but I could see the worry creeping in. My son had already learned how to brace for disappointment before finishing elementary school. Jason was waiting when I pulled up. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were sunken, and he'd shaved too close to the skin, leaving a raw line under his jaw. I got into the passenger seat of his car, and for a minute, we just sat in silence. The envelope rested between us on the console like a loaded weapon neither of us wanted to touch. You want me to open it? I asked finally. Jason stared ahead for a long time before nodding once. Yeah, please. I peeled back the seal slowly, unfolded the papers, and began to scan the results line by line. My pulse thudded in my ears as I reached the part that mattered. I looked over at him, my voice barely above a whisper. Jason, the test says the probability of paternity is less than 1%. He didn't move. He just closed his eyes for a long time, his jaw working slowly like he was chewing words he couldn't say out loud. When he finally spoke, his voice was dry and level. I think I already knew, but I guess I hoped I was wrong. He didn't cry. He didn't raise his voice. He just stared out the windshield, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked completely still. You still want to go in there? I asked, my hand still on the paper. I need to, he said quietly. She's lied to me long enough. And it's not just about me anymore. We walked up the driveway side by side, saying nothing, the air between us thick with words that had nowhere to go. Inside, the dining room was already full, Mom hovering near the wine, Callie preening in some brand new dress, Delilah sitting on the couch playing with a tablet, while Spencer quietly colored beside her. Jared gave me a glance as we walked in, his eyebrows rising just enough to ask, "Is this it?" I nodded once. He understood. Dinner started like any other. Small talk, weather, traffic, Spencer's school. Every time I tried to shift the conversation toward him, Mom or Callie would pivot it back to Delilah's voice lessons or Instagram followers. My fork scraped against the plate as I forced down another bite of food. Callie was mid-sentence about Delilah's upcoming audition when I set my utensils down and reached into my bag. "Your fashion sense is great," I said evenly. "But you post a lot of Delilah online too, don't you?" Callie looked up, laughing softly like it was a compliment. "Well, yeah, people love her. They say she has Jason's eyes." I kept my gaze steady. "Really?" "Because I don't think she looks like Jason at all." The table fell silent. Jared sat up straighter. Mom's wine glass paused halfway to her mouth. Jason's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. The words were already there, stacked neatly in my throat. "What are you trying to say?" Callie asked, her voice cracking just slightly. I reached into my bag and placed the envelope on the table. "I'm saying Jason had questions, and now he has answers. We had a DNA test done." Callie went pale. She looked at Mom, who stared at me with wide eyes full of something between betrayal and fear. Jason didn't say a word. "That's a lie," Callie said finally, her voice rising. "You're lying. You're trying to ruin my marriage." I slid the papers toward her. "Read them." She didn't touch them. Instead, she looked to Mom, who stood suddenly, voice sharp with panic. "How dare you bring something like this here? In front of the children?" Jared stood up and calmly walked Spencer and Delilah into the backyard. I watched them through the window, swinging side by side, oblivious to the wreckage building behind the glass. Callie's voice broke. "Jason, don't believe this. I love you. She's your daughter." Jason finally stood, picked up the papers, and folded them once. "You lied to me," he said quietly. "We got married when she was 3. I've raised her since then. But I deserve the truth." Mom put her arm around Callie, glaring at me like I was the villain. "Why would you do this? You're trying to tear this family apart." I met her gaze with all the steel I had left. "I didn't tear anything apart. Callie did that. You just kept letting her." Callie broke then. She started crying, great heavy sobs that shook her shoulders. And when Jason asked her who the father really was, she whispered his name like it burned her mouth. "Travis. From the marketing firm. When you were in Denver." I looked away, not because I couldn't hear it, but because I already knew. I'd known before the envelope ever arrived. Mom sat down, stunned. Callie collapsed into the nearest chair. Jason folded the papers and tucked them into his jacket. "I'm going to take Delilah home," he said quietly. "We'll talk later." And just like that, he left. The back door creaked open, and I heard Spencer's voice laughing as he chased Delilah across the lawn. They were still innocent, for now. I thought that dinner would be the worst of it, that nothing after could possibly sting more than watching my sister crumble under her own lies, or seeing my mother look at me like I had taken a knife to her favorite child. But I was wrong, because the fallout didn't hit like a single crash. It came in waves, slow, deliberate, and with nowhere soft to land. The following morning, I moved through my house in silence, the way you do after a storm, half expecting to find something broken on the floor. Spencer was at the kitchen table building a Lego ship, humming quietly under his breath, blissfully unaware of how much had detonated over dinner the night before. Jared read the news on his phone, occasionally sipping coffee, offering me wordless support with the occasional glance. No one said anything about what had happened at Mom's. That changed 2 hours later when my phone rang. It was my mother. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the decline button, heart thudding with something between dread and resentment. Eventually, I answered, because that's what daughters like me always do, even when we shouldn't. Her voice wasn't its usual polished cheer. It was rough, strained, and missing all its usual sparkle. "Madeline," she said slowly, "we need to talk." I kept my voice even. "About what? The fact that my son's birthday was hijacked? Or the fact that you spent the entire dinner defending Callie's lies while telling me I'd destroyed the family?" She sighed, long and tired. "I've been up all night. I've been talking to Callie. Things are changing. That got my attention. I leaned against the kitchen counter, keeping one eye on Spencer in the next room. What kind of changes? She's finally admitting some things. About the way she's handled her life. About how she's used people. She knows she hurt Jason, and she says she wants to try to fix it. She told me last night she's going to tell Travis about Delilah. For a second, I didn't say anything. I had expected denial, more gaslighting, more layered attempts to pretend everything was fine if we all just shut up long enough. I had not expected ownership. And you? I asked. Are you finally ready to admit how much damage you've done? How you raised two daughters like one of them was a trophy and the other was a burden? There was a pause on the line. Then her voice cracked, just slightly. I know I've made mistakes. I didn't see it back then, but I'm starting to now. And I want to make things right. Especially with Spencer. I hurt him, and I know that. My throat tightened before I could respond. It wasn't just the words. It was the rare, disarming sincerity in them. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough. But it was something. And for the first time in years, I believed she might actually mean it. You can come by, I said quietly. Spencer would want to see you. But this can't be another reset. This isn't something that gets buried. I understand, she whispered. I'll call first. She hung up, and I stood there for a long time. The dial tone ringing in my ears like the sound of something breaking and reforming all at once. The next few weeks were strange, slow, but filled with careful shifts. Jason filed for divorce. He didn't want to fight about it. He just wanted peace and a stable environment for Delilah. Surprisingly, he and Travis ended up talking more than anyone expected. Turns out, Travis hadn't known Delilah existed. Callie had never told him. When she finally did, his reaction was one of stunned silence that slowly turned into cautious interest. No threats, no anger, just shock, and then responsibility. They arranged a series of meetings, small at first, monitored closely. Delilah didn't understand the full picture yet, but Jason and Callie agreed to tell her the truth in phases, in a way she could handle. She still lived with Callie, but Jason stayed close, checking in, attending school events, and maintaining the bedtime routines they'd built over years. He refused to disappear. And strangely, Travis didn't try to insert himself too quickly either. He seemed to understand that biology didn't erase what had already been built. My mother started showing up differently too. She started inviting Spencer over on her own, just him. No fanfare, no guest of honor banners, no Delilah distractions. Once she took him to the science museum. Another time, she brought over a model rocket kit and helped him build it on the patio while Jared and I watched from the kitchen window, surprised into silence. Callie sent me a letter about a month after the dinner. Handwritten, not typed, which alone felt like a strange throwback to a different version of her. She said she was sorry, not just for the birthday or the DNA or the lies, but for the years of dismissiveness, the way she made everything about herself, the way she used her proximity to Mom to elevate herself at the expense of everyone else. She said she had started therapy and was trying to learn how to take care of herself instead of manipulating everyone around her into doing it for her. At first, I didn't know if I believed it. But then I saw it. Not in words, but in actions. Fewer selfies. More pictures of Delilah and Spencer playing together. Less performative posts online, more genuine moments. She even paid Delilah's school tuition out of her own pocket without asking for help, which might not sound like much, but for Callie, it was monumental. 6 weeks after that fateful dinner, Jason and Delilah came over for lunch. It wasn't a big deal, just sandwiches and lemonade in the backyard, but the air felt different. Lighter, freer, like we'd all survived something bigger than ourselves. Spencer and Delilah took turns pushing each other on the tire swing, while Jared grilled hot dogs and Jason sat beside me with a beer in his hand, looking 10 years younger. She's doing better, he said after a long pause, nodding toward Callie's car parked down the street. I didn't think I'd say that, but she is. She's trying, I admitted. And trying counts. He took a long sip of his drink. Thanks for pushing it. For not letting it stay buried. I didn't do it for her, I said. I did it for Spencer. For Delilah. For all of us. Jason nodded. Still, you were the first person who told the truth when no one else wanted to hear it. The backyard echoed with the sound of kids laughing. My mother sat near the flower beds, sorting leaves with Spencer, while Delilah tried to find the brightest one to impress her. It felt surreal, like we were in some alternate timeline where healing wasn't just a fantasy. And then came the surprise. Mom called and invited all of us for dinner. Just the family, no extended guests, no distractions. I was hesitant at first, unsure if it was a real step forward or another theatrical apology dressed up as a performance. But I said yes. So did Jason. So did Callie. Everyone came. When we walked into her house, the dining table was set simply. No elaborate centerpieces, no themed banners, no glittery name cards. Just two small cakes. One with Spencer's name, the other with Delilah's. Equal in size, equal in decoration, each one lit with a simple candle. "Spencer," Mom said, kneeling beside him. "Grandma wants to say she's sorry for not listening before. You deserve better. I'm going to do better." He looked at her, serious in a way only children can be, then gave a shy smile and hugged her without a word. Later that evening, as we packed up leftovers and helped clear the dishes, Spencer whispered to me as I tucked a napkin into the bag. "Mom," he said, "sometimes telling the truth makes everything kind of messy, but it's still the right thing to do, right?" I paused, my throat catching as I looked at his face, so full of clarity, so trusting of the world. "Yes," I said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "It's always the right thing, even when it hurts." He nodded and went back to helping Delilah fold napkins. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe we might actually be okay. 6 months later, I stood at the kitchen window watching Spencer chase Delilah through the backyard, their laughter rising into the breeze like it belonged to another world entirely. The seasons had shifted since that night. Everything came undone, and somehow, in the quiet aftermath, we had begun stitching ourselves back together, unevenly, imperfectly, but with care. My mother sat cross-legged beside them, helping them press autumn leaves between the pages of a scrapbook she brought over earlier that morning. She was different now, not unrecognizable, not entirely changed, but softened, like someone who had finally realized that love isn't meant to be distributed based on achievement or obedience, but freely given, especially to children who never asked to be ranked. Jared came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder like he used to do when things felt simple. "Hard to believe," he murmured quietly, watching Spencer lift a giant red leaf like a prize. "I honestly didn't think we'd get here." I nodded, pressing my cheek into the side of his face. "Neither did I, but it finally feels like everyone's moving in the same direction, for once." After the family dinner with the 2 cakes, something shifted permanently. No one pretended nothing had happened anymore. No one erased Spencer's name from the narrative. My mother started asking about his science projects, attending his school events without comparing him to Delilah. She'd even framed his volcano photo in her living room, placing it right next to Delilah's recital portrait. And somehow, that one small gesture had meant more than all her apologies combined. Jason had moved into a new place across town. He and Delilah spent weekends together, movie nights on Fridays, trips to the library, and quiet dinners where she didn't have to perform or impress anyone. Travis had slowly stepped into a supportive role, careful not to displace what Jason had built, careful not to upend the only real family foundation Delilah had known. They were still figuring things out, but they were doing it with transparency, something none of us had experienced much of before. Callie, against all odds, had stayed in therapy. She didn't try to rebrand herself or erase her past mistakes with glossy distractions. She took smaller steps, starting with getting a job at a local nonprofit, helping with youth programs. When she brought Delilah to our house now, she didn't talk over her or dominate the room. She asked about Spencer. She asked about me. Once, she even asked if we could have coffee, just the 2 of us, to talk about things without turning it into a performance. That conversation hadn't happened yet, but for the first time in my life, I was considering saying yes. I still had the DNA results in my drawer. I never threw them away. I didn't keep them out of spite, but as a reminder that speaking up, no matter how uncomfortable, was sometimes the only path toward peace. That the truth, even when it carved through old wounds, was the only thing that had ever changed anything in our family. The doorbell rang just as I turned off the stove. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door to find Jason and Delilah standing on the porch, holding a stack of books and a lopsided box wrapped in blue tissue paper. "She wanted to bring something for Spencer," Jason said, smiling. "She picked it out herself." Delilah grinned up at me, eyes bright. "It's a meteorite." "Well, part of one." I used my allowance. I stepped aside and waved them in, heart full to the brim. "He's going to love it. Come on." They're in the yard. As they disappeared into the backyard, I stood in the entryway for a long moment, soaking it all in. The noise, the warmth, the wholeness that hadn't existed in our family for years. It was fragile, still, a thread held together by effort, not luck. But it was real. And more than that, it was ours. Sometimes I think back to the moment I almost didn't open the envelope. How I nearly convinced myself to let it stay sealed. But then I remember Spencer's face when he opened that science kit on his birthday, the way he smiled as if someone had finally remembered he mattered. I remember that, and I know I'd do it all again. Because truth doesn't always ruin families. Sometimes it's the only thing that saves them.